I thought we'd do a little Jesus teaching tonight. I was just looking and studying, and there was a part in the Bible in Matthew 12:38 where Jesus has somebody say, we're looking for a sign, and he says, only an evil and adulterous generation seeks a sign. And he says, the only sign you're going to see is a sign of the prophet Jonah. And it got me to thinking, how many times do you go to church service where they say, signs and wonders? Expect a miracle. Miracle service. See God's power moving. And here Jesus says, only an evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign. Then he goes on to say, you're only going to see the sign of Jonah. But you know, when you look at that word adulterous generation, he can't be saying everybody's fooling around on their wives or everybody's fooling around on their husbands. That's not what it means. In biblical mysticism, adultery means you are intercoursing with other than the bridegroom. Whether you're male or female, in biblical mysticism, the bridegroom is God or Christ, okay? Actually, if you go back to Psalm 19, you find it's the Son. And of course, Jesus being the Son God, which I can go into a little later, he is the bridegroom. And so then your intercourse is supposed to be with the Christ, who then intercourses and deposits the incorruptible seed within you, which gives birth to the Christ child. But an adulterous generation means that you are not intercoursing with the higher mind, with the Christ consciousness. You are intercoursing with the lower mind, and that's adultery. So that means an adulterous generation. If you are obeying Jesus Christ and you're into meditation, then you're going into the upper room, into the chamber, and the bridegroom penetrates you. The marriage of the Lamb is consummated, and you are with your husband, who is the Christ. This is all mysticism. But an adulterous generation are people who do not meditate, who do not go into the higher realms, who do not go into the upper room, but who are intercoursing with the lower mind, which is God's enemy. So that's what he talks about, adultery. But when you talk about Jesus saying there shall be no sign given to such a generation other than the sign of Jonah, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Now, what do you want to do? Do you want to take that literally and say Jesus was saying that as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in a fish? Well, remember something. Jesus said in John 6:63, my words are spirit, and it says in Mark 4:34 that Jesus never spoke without a parable. So he was always speaking in symbolisms. And if he's speaking in symbolisms, then it's going to be contrary to the Bible's teachings to take it literally. I know this comes as a grave shock to tradition for me to say such a thing like this, but nobody ever was hanging out inside of a stomach of a fish for 3 days and lived to tell the tale. It just is against God's law. When you see something like that, you are looking at Eastern symbolisms. You're looking at Eastern mysticism. Right now I'm going to have you look at a young lady. I want to introduce. Come over here. I got you. What do you say? You want to say hello to everybody? Yeah. Where you been? We had you on the beginning of the show. Where were you? Hey, I heard you were to the doctor the other day. Did you get a good report? See you later? Say goodbye to everybody. All right, Pris. Just wanted to get a little Pris on and say hello. But anyhow, when you see that a fish swallows a man and 3 days later throws up and out comes an evangelist, that could be true. No. It's speaking in deep Eastern mysticism. And let's take a look at that. Because Jesus is saying in the same way as Jonah was in that fish, he would be in the earth. So we have really something mystical to look at. You can only see this type of a miracle, if you want to call it that, with the single eye. You can't see it with the human eye. But the story of Jonah is a story, an allegorical story of deep mysticism. It is not a literal story. You cannot take it literally. It says in Psalm 78:2, God speaks in parables. Jonah was aboard a ship. Okay. Now, if you get in to understand the story of Jonah, Jonah being the ship means you, the ship, is you. Your mind. Your ego. So when you are in control of things, you're Jonah on the ship. Okay? In other words, you're charting your own course. You're in charge of everything. You're Jonah on the ship. Want to come over here, Frank? Okay. Now, what happens? The sea starts churning. Okay. The sea is really churning up. And basically what that means when the sea is churning is that your emotions are starting to drive you crazy. See, basically the story of Jonah, as most biblical stories and mystical stories, is a psychological story. Here you are on your ship, rowing your own boat, completely in charge of your life, and screwing it up, as we all do. You're floundering on the rocks, and you're going from one mess to the other. And then suddenly this storm comes up in your life. And it becomes so tumultuous that you find you're not really able to sail your ship any longer. You're not able to guide your own life any longer. You're not able to run things any longer. And you find yourself floundering, and to the point where you wind up overboard. That's what the story says happened to Jonah. But now Jonah is floundering in the deep sea, which is God's truth. The deepest sea is God's truth. Once you are separated from the boat, that means once you are separated from the carnal mind, and this all goes into meditation, once you leave the mind, you're leaving the boat. When you're in the deep sea as Jonah was, then you're in deep meditation. And there is where you can be swallowed by the fish. And the fish is always God. When you sink to the very depths, when all hell is breaking loose, and the storms of your life have overwhelmed you, then you are Jonah, who can no longer captain his boat. You are no longer in charge of things. You've been dumped overboard, and you're floundering, and you're looking for help, somebody to save you. And only then can you be saved by the fish. Only then can you be swallowed by the fish, because up until that time, you're going to do anything you can to try to work your way out of this thing. So that's the sign. And that's what Jesus is talking about. Give yourself up spiritually. Jump overboard spiritually. And you do that by meditating. The only way that you can jump overboard, the only way that you can get off that boat, the only way that you can give yourself up so you can be swallowed by that fish, which is what we call the universal natural essence of God within you, is by meditation. I mean, you don't have to go on a boat out in the middle of the ocean. This is all symbolic language. You're on your boat. Your boat is yourself. Your boat is your ego. Your boat is your mind. But what the Bible is telling you is that Jesus is saying that the only possible way that you will see the Son of Man, which is the Christ within you, is when you finally are renewed. That's the 3 days and 3 nights, by casting yourself overboard or going into meditation where you take no thought. Practice the single eye is jumping overboard. That's what it means. Okay? That's the only way. There's a newness, and this newness is the 3 days and 3 nights. That number 3 is 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb, and 3 days and 3 nights in the fish. Where does that come from? Here's where it comes from. We've been through this, but bear with it. When the sun in the sky comes down on November the 21st, it goes through the constellation, the Southern Cross. It's crucified. That's on, December the 21st. Then on December the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, the sun sits entombed in the bowels of the earth. It's called the winter solstice. Okay? On December the 25th, Christmas Day, by the trajectory of the earth, the sun is born and starts its upward arc. So here then is the 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb right here. The sun in the sky must spend 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb of the earth. Is that better? Right, get that? Yeah. The sun must spend 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb of the earth on December 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, or it can't be born again on December the 25th. All right? And that's where this comes from. That's Jonah being in the whale 3 days and 3 nights, and that's Jesus being in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights. See, it says in Matthew 12:41, Jesus is still talking about this, and he says, the men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation and shall condemn it, because they repented because of Jonah. What's that mean to you? Can that be relevant to you? I mean, who the heck knows the men of Nineveh? Or where the heck is Nineveh? Who, you know? And then it says in Matthew 12:42, the queen of the south shall rise up, for she came from the uttermost to hear the wisdom of Solomon. We know what the men of Nineveh are. The men of Nineveh are the thoughts which have been changed by the one who came from the fish. In the Kabbalah, the ancient Kabbalah of the mystic Jews, it says, God has his dwelling place in the great sea and was a fish therein. Jesus, everywhere when Jesus would go, they'd make the sign of the fish. See? So the men of Nineveh are thoughts that change because of an inner encounter. When you suddenly find yourself floundering in the sea, when you finally give up trying to steer your own course, steer your own ship, and you finally say, I can't do it anymore, and you get onto that lotus position or whatever you want to do and start meditating, and you go above the thoughts of the mind. You're never giving up now, friends, until you go above the thoughts of the mind. But once you go above the thoughts of the mind, you're giving up. And once you give up and separate from the thoughts of the mind, then you're in the fish. And then the change can come. And then the men of Nineveh, that's the thoughts that have been driving you crazy and accusing you and filling you full of fear and guilt and depression, they change. And they change because you've been in the fish. And you spent the 3 days and 3 nights. In other words, there has been a change. You've gone through the crucifixion of the flesh via meditation. You spent the 3 days and 3 nights in that which is the deepness of meditation, and now you are to be born again through that which is the sun rising December the 25th, or through the meditation experience. So here we begin then to see, what do we do? How can we fulfill what Jesus was talking about? And he's very clear about it. He said the only possible way to understand this, the only sign you'll ever encounter is that sign of Jonah, and that sign which is Jesus, that sign which is the sun being entombed 3 days and 3 nights. You've got to understand all of these things symbolically. You've got to understand them mystically. You've got to understand that they're not literal. There was no fish that swallowed a man and then spit him up. There was no Samson that lost all of his power because this girl cut his hair. That's a mystical story. It's a symbolic story. And what it means, quite simply, is Samson was a Nazarene. And the Nazarene, the hair which grew out from the top of the head, symbolized spirit, which gave him power, which gives us all power. And so the Nazarene wouldn't cut their hair because then they felt that they were cutting away spirit. And the woman, Delilah, represents the emotions. Woman always represents emotions in mysticism. And she comes along, and it is the emotions that trick us. And when the emotions have tricked us, she cuts the hair. In other words, the emotions cut away that which is the growth of the spirit, and you're weak and you're not able to overcome the things that come against you. But what do? We take a literal story of Samson and Delilah instead of understanding the mystical nature of it. The entire Bible is psychological stories, mystical stories. And doesn't it make sense to you that can't you take from that Samson and Delilah and don't let anybody cut your hair? And that doesn't mean physical hair. It means don't allow your emotions to cut away that which is the spirit that is growing from the higher realms. Because if you do, if you allow the spirit to be cut away by the emotions, then the things that come against you will overwhelm you. But if you allow spirit to grow and allow spirit to grow, then you'll overcome those things. You say, well, how do you know that those words mean that? Well, it's the same as when you say, let's go shoot the bull or three sheets to the wind. How do you know? All of those things have meanings. And in the same way that we understand our symbolic language, you have to understand the symbolic language of the ancient people. I wanted to share with you the fact that we have a Hidden Meanings TV network. And you can be a part of that Hidden Meanings TV network if you would like to. All you have to do is call that phone number you see on the screen, area code 609-971-0537. 609-971-0537. And all you have to say is, hey, I want to be on the Hidden Meanings TV network. And what happens every month, when you look, we'll go back to the board here. I want to show you something I think is pretty neat. When you see the intelligence of the ancients and how they wrote in the deep mystical ways, but yet they had such, there was such a knowledge that is so far advanced of what we think. But in understanding the constant speed of light, I think this is neat. Constant speed of light runs 186,400 miles per second. Speed of light. Well, when you look up in the Bible and you see the tribe of Judah, which is the tribe of spirit, was positioned at the eastern side of the camp. And it says in the Bible, at the point of the rising sun. Now, Jesus said, if your eye be single, your body will fill with light. And, of course, the tribe of Judah represents spirit and represents that which is light. Well, if you look in the Bible, guess how many people it says were in the tribe of Judah? 186,400. You say, oh, is that a coincidence? Of course not. Of course not. It was written by the people or that magnificence which created the universe, obviously. I mean, if you take, I mean, one of the things that struck me, the obvious creation, the obvious power of the universe, when I saw first time a dog give birth beautifully. Women, we need doctors and gynecologists and all that, and to see a dog give birth to 9 pups and know exactly what to do, break the sac, cut the umbilical cord, do everything perfectly. So how does this dog know this? The dog knows how to do that. You call it instinct, but it's programmed. The dog is programmed like a computer. And that's what Jesus Christ said. That dog is following the single eye. It has no choice, but you do. And most of you have elected not to practice the single eye because you're afraid your church has said it's evil. That single eye will carry you instinctively to the place where you should be in the same way that the goose leaves Canada and winds up in Acapulco and knows how to get there. How does it know? Because it's programmed. And there's a programming for you if you'll only do what Jesus Christ said and practice the single eye in meditation. I think it's so fantastic as we sit and the New Age comes upon us, and so many people are frightened of New Age. It's like saying, well, I don't believe in that New Age stuff. here it is March, but I don't believe in March, so as far as I'm concerned, it's December. Well, how come you don't believe in March? Well, because my church says not to get involved in that stuff. That makes as much sense as saying, I don't believe in Aquarius, because I'm not going to get involved in that stuff. You're living on a planet that's going through the universe at 40,000 miles an hour. The planet is part of the zodiac. It's part of the universe. It's part of an astrological and astronomical fact. And the entire universe is changing now. There's a great shaking going on. We're going out of the constellation Pisces to the constellation Aquarius. And all of these changes are happening. And it wouldn't be so bad, except Jesus Christ is the one who prophesied all of this going on. You know, you see people who are going into the higher consciousness. That's all you hear about now. I mean, even if you're like born again, you realize that that's true. I'm saying, you know, I'm going up to the higher consciousness. I'm going to meditate. There's New Age stores all over the place. There's New Age music all over the place. There's New Age books. And they all talk about going up into the higher consciousness. And it's all happening during this age of Aquarius. And the age of Aquarius is the man with the pitcher of water. The man who's pouring the pitcher of water. That's Aquarius. You know, in the Bible, in Luke, the 22nd chapter, the 10th verse, Jesus made this very strange statement. And when you think about the New Age, maybe you ought to think about this before you put it down. Jesus said, when you see the man with the pitcher of water go into the house where he goes, follow him to the upper room. Now, the house of Aquarius is the constellation Aquarius, and that's the age that you're living in now, and that's why people are going into the higher consciousness, which is the upper room. Now, you may be, you know, say, well, I'm born again, and I don't believe in that stuff, and I'm not allowed. But think of this for a minute. Think of this. Is it a coincidence that Jesus said that? And I mean, you know, are you willing to say, oh, he didn't mean that? Wonder if he did. Wonder if he did. He did say that, didn't he? He said, when you see the man with the pitcher of water, and it says Jesus never spoke but in a parable. So if he was speaking symbolically, and he meant during the age of Aquarius, people would enter into their house, into themselves, and they would go to the upper room, which means the higher consciousness, and he would meet them there, don't you think you better really think twice about putting that down? Because a lot of Christians put that down. They say, oh, I don't believe in this New Age, and I don't believe in this astrology and Aquarius and all that stuff. But if Jesus, when he said you'll see a man with the pitcher of water, meant this age, don't you think you better make sure that that's not what he meant? Because you don't know, right? You can't say for sure he didn't mean that. Maybe he did. Because you say, well, he meant that the disciples were going to see a man with a pitcher of water, carrying a pitcher of water. Well, let me give you a little something to think about. In those days, men would never carry a pitcher of water. That was a disgrace. But the man carrying the pitcher of water is Aquarius. And Jesus was not practicing astrology per se by saying that. He was simply identifying when it would be possible for people to enter within themselves, rise to the higher consciousness, and meet him. Because that would be his second coming. Well, you say, well, I don't believe that's his second coming, but in John 14:20, Jesus says, at that time you will know I am in the Father, you in me, and I in you. So, maybe he did mean that, huh? You got people that'll get madder than heck about that. But you can't, you can get mad, but you can't say that Jesus didn't say that, because he did. And, let's be factual about it, you may, by defending your church, be coming against the instructions of Jesus that during this Aquarian age, we should be entering within and going to the upper room. Because, like, when he said enter into the house, Paul said, you're God's house. So, by entering into the house, Jesus could say just, and isn't that what's happening now? Aren't people entering within themselves all over the place in the New Age? And aren't they going up to the higher consciousness, and that's all you hear about? I mean, the doctors are teaching it and all over. So then, maybe you better think twice about making fun of this, because if Jesus meant that, you're missing it, aren't you? And how easy it would be for you to find out. Practice the signal I, like he said, in this new age. And you meet him inside of you in the upper room. Not bad? Okay. Christian Village Church, New Age, 134 Route 9, Forked River, New Jersey. Next.